Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I decided I would do a spontaneous live stream today just to, first of all, connect with the Telegram community, which I'm really happy is developing into what I anticipated it might be, which is sort of like a life raft in the increasing deplatforming and censorship that we're now obviously witnessing before our eyes on many levels. So I anticipated that this platform might actually provide an off-ramp and an eventual, way for us to find that next platform where we do not have our information captured, we're not being sort of surveilled, and then, all the things we're seeing happening with conventional platforms like YouTube and Facebook. So, there's a little bit of an irony here because I am using a backup account on YouTube and I don't know how long I'll be able to use it, but it's fine because I've been waiting for this moment actually when I can finally withdraw from platforms that I know that I'm colluding with in terms of using this technology, which is not actually safe. Talk about informed consent, meaning like I'm able to get myself out there, you're able to easily access the information, but the data or metadata really is being used in a way that in this day and age has real world implications when it comes to our basic human rights and freedoms. So that's why on some level, for example, our GreenMedInfo YouTube page, our Say Your G YouTube page, pretty much disabled. And both times it was actually because I was addressing this kind of topic when it came to bio-apartheid. I'm using the term medical apartheid in this talk because it's more available to people, but I want to go deeper into that discussion in a minute. So, right now there's a little window open where we can still use the platform, connect with it, but be aware that my wife and partner, Kelly Brogan, who has a page about 7 years in the making, 100 and maybe 60,000 followers on Facebook, just got deleted for actually posting a meme about censorship that apparently Facebook decided was dangerous to the community for posting. So there's a lot of irony there. And surprisingly, GreenMedInfo, our Facebook page of 540,000 followers, is still there. Yet when we post, you literally get maybe 2 likes and a share. So it's another way of boiling the frog and censoring in a way that's not as obvious. So the reality is that we have still Telegram, we have our newsletter list and email as a way to stay in touch. So keep that in mind. My number one suggestion would be join the GreenMedInfo newsletter list. That's GreenMedInfo.com /. And then of course, Stand for Health Freedom. Go there, sign up for the free emails and campaigns, take an action, and be part of a huge growing movement because we have something like 250,000 advocates that have taken action in the past year against what are extremely draconian and anti-freedom executive orders. And now we're seeing some legislation that's being introduced that also intends to strip us of our exemptions from vaccination. So these are campaigns that are there right now for you. So when I do disappear from these platforms, either through overt censorship or because I choose to not engage them, which is likely to happen soon, you can always stay in touch with us through Telegram and GreenMedInfo. So basically, it feels good to know there's a few hundred people here. So it's not, a waste of any of our time to do this. So what I wanted to address is what is extremely concerning and has been from the beginning of, the so-called pandemic, which is that in Israel right now, there is the rolling out of what is shockingly, eerily similar to what happened in Nazi Germany. And, you say these things today, you compare histories, and there's a phrase about history repeating itself. We're seeing that happen right now. We need to understand a little bit of history in order to understand what's happening right now. So Back when the Nazis took power, they had an agenda of racial hygiene, where you literally had to prove your descent in order to prove that you weren't a dirty virus for the German population, because that is exactly how, oh my cat, the Jews were characterized within that system. They were perceived and described as viruses, vermin, disease vectors, and they needed to be extinguished. That language, okay, and looking at the German population as literally the body politic, as an organism, was what enabled Hitler to take power and to describe himself as the Robert Koch of medicine, right? The so-called originator of germ theory. So, no, he said the Robert Koch of politics. That's what Hitler described himself as. He was there to eliminate the virus of, poorly, put together people. Genetically inferior is part of the eugenics movement. And when you go deeper down the rabbit hole, you find that eugenics was born here in the United States, and that Hitler was funded, and the rise of the Third Reich, by Wall Street. And many atrocities had happened here in the history of the United States that go back 400 years due to slavery. This is actually documented in a book by Henrietta Washington called Medical Apartheid. And this book has gone somewhat viral in the past year because she documents in really vivid detail the history of torture and abuse and medical experimentation on African American populations in the United States. And one of the points she makes is that the Tuskegee experiment that is being referenced now as a reason why African Americans are, quote, vaccine hesitant is absolutely just a distraction from the reality, which is the medical system as of right now is not trustworthy. So blaming the victim of that reality, which is those who are, again, vaccine hesitant, i.e. we know that vaccines cause damage and it's being covered up, including African-American populations that have no reason to trust that all the propaganda being thrown out there is just being put out there for their good. You're right. So anyway, her book is very interesting, and it's, again, titled Medical Apartheid. So it's a very old history, and there are reasons why medicine has been used as a political weapon from its advent, really. I mean, so that's part of what is coming to light in this moment, which is that we have seen the rise of a medical dictatorship that is global in nature, which constitutes a biogovernance structure, if you will, where the entire world and all of the constituent legislation and constitutions that would protect civil and human rights have been suspended because of emergencies, right? So that suspension of basic rights through the justification of public health emergencies is how literally this world was put into suspension. And I say the world, the globe was put in suspension. The economies and socioeconomic activities completely suspended because of the rise of this ideology, which has been literally ingrained into us, has physically been indoctrinated into us, from, before birth, but definitely at birth and, every year after that, because the medical establishment operates through trauma, through institutionalized systematic traumatization of populations. So let's look at male circumcision as an example. Not medically justifiable, done at a time when literally the ritual is to arouse an infant in order to perform the procedure. This is absolutely a ritual, and it is done in such a way that it will affect forever after that male's individuation, their psycho-spiritual development, their trauma body, so that they can be more easily captured later in life, by other agendas and other institutions. And this is the way the medical establishment operates. And there's so many examples of where it has been architected in order to make us susceptible to the agenda that we are seeing right now literally take over the world. So that's part of what I've been speaking to since this began. It's also part of what I've been speaking to for the past 10 years, okay? So when it comes to germ theory, what we have seen in the past year or so is it has been weaponized and wielded as a geopolitical instrument and or weapon against the world's populations. So that is why we are in this situation where they're now consolidating the gains, the power grabs, the lurching forward of what is fundamentally fascist, totalitarian, dystopian type of policies throughout the world. They're consolidating that now. They're betting that the world's populations do not wake up to the point that is required, which will then lead to certain solutions that I will end this presentation with, because they have literally executed what is beyond even the term crime can describe. Okay, let's just look at the genocidal impacts alone. The UN in July released a statement regarding the devastating mortality impacts that will occur in 25 countries that are already impoverished. So even the UN is acknowledging that the lockdowns and the cessation of socioeconomic activity under the false auspices of saving a very few vulnerable, population from infection risk, right, from a novel new form of what is fundamentally a common cold virus / exosome. This justification doesn't stand when you look at literally the tens of millions of people that will die as a result of that policy. So when you weigh the decision in terms of the benefits and the harms and how disproportionately they're distributed, right, among the world's population, you see that it's not tenable, that there is something going on here that is so obvious that once you grasp it, you are in a moral conundrum. You have a choice. Do you stay complicit? Do you stay silent? Do you watch the cattle cars, going off to Auschwitz, right? I mean, this is literally the metaphorics operative here, because they have already devised quarantine camps, which we know about, okay? We reported on GreenMedInfo on the CDC's documents stating that they are at least thinking about green zones, which are literally COVID internment camps, where high-risk individuals would be forced to be within them, and they would, again, be subject to the same experimental vaccines that are being rolled out right now, and all the other isolation type of effects, which have extremely high mortality associated with them. Okay, social distancing is isolation. It is known to be a form of torture. And that's what apartheid literally means, by the way. It means aparthood, right? It means separation. It's tearing the psycho-spiritual and physical fabric of humanity apart. Segregation, okay, of connection, like preventing and precluding connection. We are human because we connect. We are intercorporeal, intersubjective beings. Okay, we have interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh said. You can't separate out humans into little nodes without taking their humanity away. And that is absolutely what is operative right here. And that is part of what I would describe as the sorcery of this, operation, is that they have managed to convince us that we are bodies, not souls, certainly not civil beings that have civil rights or human rights, that we are animals. And this is what Giorgio Agamben, the amazing Italian philosopher who's spoken out to a great opposition in this window, is discussing in his series of books, okay? Homo Sacer, which is about how fundamentally the modern state has redefined humanity into sheer animality. So we are treated like the animals, which, by the way, we all, to some degree, probably collude in a system of factory farmed. And although a lot of us are waking up, and clearly that's the advocacy around the health and wellness spaces, we're not going to support that crap anymore. But the point is industrialized food production, the way we treat animals, the way we treat nature is absolutely blowing back on us now. We are the cattle. We are being treated as if we are animals. We are being muzzled with submission signaling devices. which is the opposite story of it being virtue signaling, and you're protecting the more vulnerable by donning a mask that, if they're blue, have literally, the Teflon coating. And, regardless, the point is that we are in a situation now where our very definition as humans has been completely challenged, suspended, inverted, and there's a lot of implications to this. So when we see Israel rolling out a system of vaccine passports, which is very reminiscent of what happened in Nazi Germany, where you needed a passport to prove your ethnic purity, that you had Aryan descent. If you didn't prove that, you were potentially going to be put in a concentration camp and exterminated. Does that remind you of anything? The fact that it's happening in Israel, again, is so unconscionable to me. I mean, we did an interview with Vera Shiraz, who was a Holocaust survivor. Okay, she did an interview with Leah Wilson for Stand for Health Freedom, right? Where hopefully every one of you is on the newsletter list and has taken an action there. And she is pointing out that this is the same thing that happened in Nazi Germany. She's seeing the same signs. This, and by the way, just referencing this is what will get you censored, i.e. canceled, deleted. So when you are speaking to facts, when you are referencing the truth or questioning things, and you get completely exterminated from that conventional system, you're already seeing the metaphorical equivalent of what's next down the road. And I don't say this to scare people, but I do think people should be aware that there are very well-trodden steps to genocide. And this is something I always like to point out. And it's not ever going to get old because we keep moving forward. In fact, here's an update for you. I will share my screen here in a second so you can see. This was actually posted by an Indian because his country is seeing, basically, we're at number 7 according to his estimation in terms of where we are in the genocidal march. And again, I'm going to tell you this because I know you can handle it, and because unless we are able to see the darkness for what it is and shed light on it, we are not able to do anything about it, because pretending like it's not happening is not working, okay? The CDC is saying right now, in fact, it was supposed to happen this morning, they were going to release their guidance on what the vaccinated population of the United States and the unvaccinated populations of the United States can do. So if you think it's just happening in Israel or Europe or any other place that's saying they're going to do this, it's happening everywhere. This agenda is coming from the top down. When I say that, I'm talking about there's literally a trillionaire class, who is directing a lot of this. You'll never hear their names. So people like Bill Gates, they're just puppets, basically. They're easy to project upon and hate, and everyone wants them to be gone. But the reality is that this is systemic, it's distributed, and we can't fall prey to just thinking that they're just bad people out there, that if we could just get them away or out of the picture, then things are better. Because honestly, we're inverting the very thing that's happening to people like myself, which is they'd like for us to go away too. Well, if we decentralize this process and all of us take responsibility, and that includes staying positive, which I know this is hard at this moment to stay positive, but I'm going to end on a really positive note, then we are accomplishing the impossible. Because the more you stay affixed to the news cycles and the more you watch, this extremely disturbing process occur, crystallizing out, the more dejected you can get, the more depressed. But I'm here to tell you that there is an answer, and it is actually spiritual. And I don't mean that in a bypassing way. Hopefully it doesn't sound that way. I'm going to try to give you a really concrete way of understanding this, at least from my perspective. But first, let me show you this because it is so helpful. And it, I think, will help us to really grasp what is going on right now. And it's probably the reason why this will get deleted. But the beauty of it is we found decentralized alternatives. For example, library, LBRY. And also we're creating our own server that is going to have all the censored content, because every time I talk about this, they decide to ding my accounts or delete the videos. Well, we have those videos and we're hearing the message. I guess we're going to have to put it behind our own membership so that at least people that care enough about our project, are willing to spend 16 cents a day, literally is what it costs to be a friend member, that's great. And that way it's not a bunch of trolls out there, and it's not me just going ahead and yelling to the world like, like Chicken Little. It's people that want to hear the message. But until then, happy to do this without any intermediary in the way. So here you go. The 10 stages of genocide. People are divided into the us and them. That's been going on since the beginning of time. So there's nothing new there. It just gets a little bit amplified when the agenda is starting to really crystallize. So the us and them right now clearly could be as simple as you're wearing a mask and I'm not. What an ingenious way to fracture and totally destroy the fabric of society is to have this ongoing civil war, which was extremely politically amplified with the last election, where suddenly you're seeing someone's ideology. It's no different than if someone was or wasn't wearing a burqa or any other sign of them being in allegiance to a type of thinking or value system that maybe only a few people have, right? People are divided into us and them. But number two, people are forced to identify themselves. So that's another part of what's going on, is that we are basically being told you need to take a side. And in the past, election cycle, if you were pro-health freedom, you were being characterized as pro-Trump, right? Or anti-Biden or whatever. And they're still doing that right now. And that's really unfortunate, but that's why Stand for Health Freedom exists as a nonpartisan, but I'd rather use the word transpartisan or metapartisan platform, in the sense that, we learned in the past year that it's not about Democrat or Republican, right? Those platforms are highly toxic, just like you can drink Pepsi or Coke and you're still gonna get harmed by it. But for now, we've come to the conclusion that it's basically freedom or tyranny. And those are terms, again, that are being weaponized. So even just algorithmically, use those terms, you're gonna be associated with the far right. But let's look at what's actually happened. They've basically suspended the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights in order to save you from a novel, new, deadly viral particle. They've literally accomplished that, okay? An international coup, which is what the rise of medical fascism, or sometimes another term to call, there's another term I'll use later, which is Foucault's, which is state racism. So we're talking about a type of racism that's not associated with ethnicity. It's associated with whether you participate in a certain type of ritual of control of the body, okay, which includes penetration with vaccination and submitting to COVID tests. That's the new state racism. And that's what Foucault talks about in terms of biopolitics and biopower, which is this state evolves, if you will, or degenerates to a point where it's all about governing a mass of bodies, okay? Where the whole point is to apply power, to control, to extract whatever resources you need from the population. And this is all done in the way that we're seeing the so-called pandemic pan out right now. So this was all studied for many decades. Like, they could see the sweep of history and the process of governments evolving now into this, basic global governance structure. And we're seeing this happen. So, okay, so we have discrimination, number three. People begin to face systematic discrimination. Now, I've been watching this, of course, when it comes to, thanks, by the way, for those who put comments in here. I should put the chat up. When it comes to vaccines and the anti-vax dialectic, which is absurd. I don't know a single person, nor would I feel comfortable with a single person I know describing themselves as anti-vax. This is literally like the term conspiracy theory, devised by the CIA, which has been confirmed by declassified documents as a way to gaslight and make look insane people that are simply questioning orthodox narratives on what happened, like the JFK assassination. That's where the term came from. So when people use the term, like, are you anti-vax, or I'm anti-vax? No, you're actually controlled opposition, or you're astroturfing this movement, because no one in their right mind would equate questioning vaccine science and efficacy or pointing out that they damage people, i.e. the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Act of 1986 has paid out $4 billion to people whose families have suffered either irreversible damage or death from vaccines. And then they're going to tell us that we're crazy or we're this group of anti-vaxxers because we question those things or we point out facts. That's what's going on right now. So basically, we are in a place where they are now systematically discriminating against individuals who, for example, do these basic things: advocate for health freedom, support natural medicine, question vaccine safety. And we're seeing a widespread deletion of those who post content, even adjacent to those who post that content. I mean, it's like that bad. So we are really seeing a very disturbing process. Of course, the information they're censoring is exactly the information you need to know about, which is why I'm proud to be so highly censored, why this platform, or the many platforms now that I'm part of, are constantly getting assaulted with that, censorship attempts, is because we're literally providing information you can't find anywhere else, that they want to disappear because their agenda cannot continue to lurch forward if you have that information. So let's go to organization. The government creates specific, I'm sorry, this is the best one right here. Dehumanization. People equated with animals, vermin, or diseases. This is exactly what the Nazis did. This is what's been done since the beginning of time. Ultimately, when a certain group is targeted as inferior, you dehumanize them so that you can destroy them with impunity, right? So your conscience is intact. Well, they're not human, so it's not inhuman or dehumanizing to do all those things to them. Well, that is what they're doing to those who, again, are seeing the truth of what is actually going on with inflated or distorted or outright fraudulent statistics when it comes to the case-demic, where they're equating positive PCR tests with active deadly disease, such that if you have one, you should be quarantined, isolated, or potentially coerced or forced vaccinated. This is obviously part of that whole dehumanization process. If we submit to it, we are consenting to the progression of these 10 stages. So 5, the organization creates specific groups, police and military, to enforce the policies. Well, didn't we just see the Pentagon and FEMA start distributing, i.e. enforcing vaccination, policy? So we have literally here an example of what is a very disturbing transition, where no longer is there any illusion generated that this is really a health agency that is trying to save the public from, again, a deadly viral particle, which happens to be part of the human virome. Again, you can get into the narrative around weaponized viruses and exosomes, and there's some truth to that. But my point is more that if they really cared about our health and protecting us from our own microbiome, they might at least acknowledge that before this, there were already 100 different coronavirus variants that were already found in the human microbiome. So this is absolutely absurd from the perspective of what would be actual infectious challenges if we did suddenly identify with, the concept that 99% of what we're comprised of, i.e. fungi and bacteria and viruses, are deadly to us. It's just illogical. It's obscenely illogical. Let me plug in my power. Okay. So that's highly concerning, isn't it? Especially when you hear of and see evidence of there being a architecting of camps that, again, are military type camps, that meaning in terms of enforcement, that are ostensibly set up to protect us again from COVID-19 infections, okay? If you want to find more information on that, go to GreenMedInfo, type Songbird into the search, and you'll find a discussion around a Hollywood film, which is interesting, one of a number of things that was indirectly funded by the Gates Foundation through a Chinese corporation they're invested in, Tencent. This film was the only one that was released during the terrible pandemic window where no one should have been doing anything, but somehow this propaganda piece came out, and it starts, the trailer with this, COVID-19, concentration camp that's 216 weeks into the pandemic. A new variant, I think it's like variant 21, is active. And they're showing us what they plan to do if they're successful, which is this is the new transmogrified war on terror, but it's now bioterror, and your body is the source of all the terrifying, deadly particles that we have to now protect each other from, and we can't even be within certain distance. It is just science fiction. Can't even make up a story this absurd, but it's happening, literally. So, okay. Then you have polarization. The government broadcasts propaganda to turn the populace against the group. Well, I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to see a good amount of it. What may happen, okay, as they obviously dial down the yield cycles for PCR in tandem with the rollout of the vaccine to make it look like, oh, suddenly COVID levels have decreased, right? The case-demic is getting better. Even though we've clearly seen through the CDC data disaster presentation, as well as new, findings around suddenly the flu disappeared, right? Because they reclassified influenza and influenza-like illness as COVID-19, is that they're going to manipulate further this narrative so that they can identify those who didn't participate in vaccination as still the primary risk factors for a resurgence or a new lockdown or new restrictions. So that is how they do it, right? First, they put you maybe in a ghetto, and then later it's actually a concentration camp. Like, that's literally the same trajectory. And I know that when I say this, this is the reason why people are getting taken out on social media, because you're not allowed to talk about this, apparently. You can't connect the dots, even though they are there in broad daylight. But this is history, and we're seeing similar patterns unfolding before our eyes. And I think people need to adult up and start to really accept the facts of the matter, which is that there is a dire threat to our loved ones, our children, and it's not just a virus. It is what they're doing to justify the response to that virus. And we haven't even talked about the largest transfer in human history of wealth and power, all done under the cover on the back of the COVID pandemic. So there you go, and get deeper into this, and you realize the motives are so clear, even if you're just looking at it from a financial perspective or just a control perspective. Okay. So 7, official action to remove and relocate people. So this is when your body no longer can enjoy the entitlements it had previously in so-called free societies, meaning you can't go to the mall, you can't go on a plane, you can't drive perhaps to certain locations because you're going to have checkpoints. This is what is going on, and this is a way of the state and this agenda to say that this body does not belong to you. I mean, they're saying it in so many ways. That's why coerced or forced vaccination is so egregious to anyone who has any sense of what they're entitled to as a human. You're not allowed to have people penetrate you with a potentially deadly intervention without your consent. But your body is literally no longer yours. And if you consent to them preventing you from entering an establishment because you're not wearing a mask, or not vaccinated, then the next step is they just take your body away. That's why Michael Ryan, emergencies programming director for the World Health Organization, early on in this event, sent the most shocking and chilling message to the world I'd ever heard, which is that they intend to take people from their homes and take family members if they suspect that they have COVID, meaning they have a temperature, or maybe they were contact traced because some distant associate ended up getting a fake PCR test, and they're going to now take you or your child from you under the false auspices of protecting the community from a deadly infection. So this is what they've messaged to the world. They've made the agenda absolutely clear. The fact that it hasn't happened in your neck of the woods, that's a good thing. And it may be a sign that people are, again, waking up and asserting their power. That said, I don't know that enough people are doing it. Or there's even more people saying, no, Sayer, that sounds crazy. And you know what? You're inciting, some type of harmful behavior by even talking about it. And that's basically what the social media platforms are telling us, is that it's dangerous, harmful information that you're sharing by even talking about this. Okay. Number 8, persecution, beginning of murders, theft of property, trial, massacres. 9, extermination. 10, denial. The government denies that it has committed a crime. Now, obviously, we do not want to move any further. And when I say we're at 7, or certain areas in the world are at 7, it's probably true. However, I think that the majority of us are still able to exercise some sovereignty, some power over the situation. So that is the good news. Okay. So obviously that's really intense information. And again, I don't want to present it in order to scare anyone. That said, I think it's time for us to really acknowledge that we are at a crux, a crossroad. And this has happened since the moment the quote pandemic descended, is that there's almost like an ontological fork in the road. Okay, so first of all, there's been an ontological, just means like reality, right? Into like you have this moment of decision, which by the way, literally means to cut, to decide. You have to make a choice. And for those of us in natural medicine and who have been observing the conventional alternative, I call it alternative, allopathic approach, we know that if you decide, for example, when you're diagnosed with cancer, to do chemo and radiation, maybe you do some integrative. The point is you made a decision. You'll never know what would have happened if your body had been given a chance to clear toxicants, to get the right nutrition, to do natural interventions. So you won't know. You can never say that you made a wrong decision. And I'm not trying to say anyone who took that path did make a wrong decision, because I can't tell you that, because they collapsed the wave function, right? They made that decision to go down the fork. The same is true for natural. If you choose to only use natural approaches to heal yourself, you'll never know if you had done that surgery or taken that medication. You could have potentially healed faster. You might have lived longer. You cannot know. I mean, your heart might know, your soul might know, but you can't prove it. So what's been happening in this window is there's an ontological speciation event. Literally, people in your life, I'm sure you've observed, totally drink the Kool-Aid, and they are convinced that everything they're being told is absolutely true, and that people like us who question are not only crazy and irresponsible, but dangerous, that we probably are a threat, and we've probably killed people for standing up to our principles by, for example, not wearing a mask. I've yet to wear a mask. I see it as a muzzle, and I see it as that slow, trajectory to genocide, literally. I do see it that way. And you can call me crazy for it, but that is how I see it. That's how I feel it. And I don't judge others that are wearing masks, because many of them just feel safer with it on. So it's not really that I'm doing this because I feel everyone else should do it. It's just that this is in me. Like I know that by suppressing my oxygen, I'm not helping my body or yours. It's just not a healthy thing to do when you're already healthy. If I was sick, if I had mucus coming out of me, if I felt I had toxicants and exosomes and viral particles coming out of me, I would potentially consider it, especially if you were uncomfortable. And I was in a situation where that was something that I had to really look at. So I'm not saying I'm totally against wearing them, even for myself, but that's not the situation. So I feel like what we are being called to do is to really look at where we have colluded in the situation thus far, producing this really scary and yet probably necessary event of watching people like Bill Gates with no medical degree, right, no medical certification, dictate to the world what's going to happen. Where he told us this was going to happen. He said, we're going to have to get these immunity passports, and we're going to have to get our vaccine, and then maybe the world's nations can end their lockdowns and economies can come back and people can gather again. This man literally told us what was going to happen, and we let him, right? How many of us really did the work of standing up on a daily basis and really going, contacting the legislators and doing everything that they know they could, because we're still free to engage the process of a grassroots type of impact here? You know if you did or you didn't, but because many of us didn't, we're now in a situation. I'm not saying I even did a good enough job, honestly. I don't think I did. I think I could do way better. The point is that we all have consented and colluded up until now, and every moment hereafter, we will have a choice of, again, deciding whether we're going to continue to collude and consent. And I mean, that includes your partner, your family members who are like, well, I'm sorry, my friend has COVID, you know, like, without having a discussion with them, right? Like, do they have COVID? What does that mean? What's the PCR test? Like, I know there's so many examples of where we can do this kind of activism. And unless we all do that and reach a critical mass, I'm afraid to say that I think it's more likely, maybe not in the US initially, in certain countries, we're going to see the unfoldment of those 10 stages. And I do think what's happening in Israel right now and medical apartheid is evidence that this is actually happening right now in real time. We are seeing what is a terrifying recurrence of potentially genocidal implications. I mean, I just reported on these two researchers showing that the Israeli COVID-19 vaccine campaigns resulted in up to 260 times increased death in the vaccinated group versus the unvaccinated group within just a few month period. 260 times. The authors likened that to a Holocaust. These are Israelis commenting on their own health ministries' data and the way in which they were covering up the reality in which the vaccines were causing people to die. So this is the situation that we are in presently. And thanks in many ways to the fact that for 10 years I've been looking at this unfolding, because vaccines is what got me into this space. Because I had children, I had to figure out what was going on. And so now I see, well, at the time I was seeing it pretty clearly that infectious disease has been used as a new form of colonialism. They were literally invading the soils of countries like, in Africa, under the auspices of saving them from deadly disease, violating international laws to do so. That was the new form of colonialism. But what we're seeing now is that everyone on the planet is being subject to a type of nano-biological colonialism that Alison McDowell and I actually discussed recently. You have the Internet of Things and you have the Internet of Bodies. And what they're doing is that they are literally trying to infuse us with nano medical devices and or interventions that will then enable us to be under 24/7 control and surveillance. And this sounds like sci-fi, but the more you go down this rabbit hole, the more you learn about the origin of the COVID-19 vaccine agenda, starting back in 2013 with a $1.5 billion DARPA contract, you'll realize that mRNA vaccines, which is how they're described out there by the manufacturers themselves, are designed to change the software, if you will, of your body. That's why I wrote a whole book on this. Regenerate is all about how microRNAs are like software for the hardware of the body. The protein coding genes are like the hardware and the mRNA are like the software. So when they devise these vaccines, the intention is to, again, upgrade your immune system, as well as ultimately with this agenda, roll out a surveillance mechanism and state that is not in any way satisfied with simply, surveilling the surface of the exterior of your body, which is like the panopticon, right? Where you have 24/7 surveillance, but to penetrate into the body and, again, under the justification of making sure your health vitals are good and you're not, a risk to yourself or others, constant monitoring, having to prove you're healthy. But again, if you go into the DARPA history of how they were designing this to create super soldiers and have this nanogel stuff put into them so that they could surveil their vitals in real time, you realize that this is not a human agenda. It's transhumanistic. And that is fundamentally what I'm seeing unfold here. Again, these are topics that, people like occasionally David Icke or others will talk about and they get deleted. So I wouldn't be surprised if they don't do that quickly to this video, but the reality is that this stuff is actually happening. You can go to the best resources on the planet, PubMed, go to DARPA websites, go to the vaccine manufacturers, you'll see this is actually happening. So what I mean here by ontological speciation is that there is a transhumanistic agenda driven by things like AI, the technocracy, driven by the need to surveil and control all bodies at all times. And then there is a return back to nature. There's a return back to community. There's a return to what is the divine intelligence within and between natural bodies and natural things. That's why if I go and project myself into the internet like this, I have to go back into nature. Like I have to ground myself, I have to breathe. I need to remember that fundamentally this is, if you will, a spiritual battleground. And there is a speciation event. Those who've decided to take the vaccine, this is like a sacrament or an initiation into a cult. This is a religion. Scientism begets medical monotheism. There's certain sacraments. The scripture is the peer-reviewed published research, which we know is all completely an excreta of the industries that fund it. And then you have the church, which is the, CDC or, there's so many different examples of these bodies that end up basically becoming proxies for our own inner authority. It's eminence-based medicine, or it's science by proclamation. So this is where we're at. And then there are those who realize, like my wife, that it's about self-ownership, that if we don't like this system, guess what? It's time for us to create our own system and take radical responsibility for that. She emancipated herself from her smartphone. I don't know anyone who's taken such a ridiculously courageous act. I mean, it's not easy, but she's done it. I'll probably join her at some point. You might not be hearing as much from me. The point is that my allegiance isn't to that system where even when you're on social media, you're being harvested constantly. So the point is that we aren't victims here. Yes, there are processes unfolding that look a heck like a meat grinder coming our way, and thank God it's not a conventional war. Imagine World War II and World War I, which were also architected, by the way, for reasons that are more economic and control-based. And again, trying to find ways to, control masses of people. That was really more what it was about. So we are in another phase where we have a spiritual war. And yes, there has been an international coup, and pharma/medicine is a big part of it. That said, we also it was relatively bloodless so far. And yes, there's a huge body count, and many of them iatrogenically induced deaths. But the point is that we are at a crux, an event horizon, where because a lot of things they can't control, including when you're living in your heart, not simply in the binary space of fight or flight or right or wrong, but you're really in your heart, you're not very predictable. You can't really be digested by an algorithm, right? And then spit back at yourself in a reactionary way. So there is a beautiful message here ultimately, which is that, yes, let's look at the darkness together. Let's just see it for what it is. Let's stand up while we can. We have Stand for Health Freedom, I'm very proud of. There are others doing great work in this space. So just go ahead, take advantage of the opportunities you have now to have a good, powerful effect in the world, and help me go this path of taking full responsibility. Let go of things that are not working, or that we are, like Amazon's a good example. I always use this. So difficult to get rid of Amazon, right, from one's life if you use it regularly. And yet, there you go. They're the ones who have a plan to deploy these drones throughout the country, which, do you think they're going to use them for surveillance of every square inch of your property or where you live? Yeah, absolutely. Are they going to use them to deploy vaccines? Absolutely. Amazon is a CDC Foundation partner. There's no difference between Amazon and the CDC or the military at this point. They're all merged together. So if we don't like that, then we're going to have to find a way to do it differently ourselves and stop whining about it, which I do plenty of that myself, trust me, still. Okay, so I'm just going to see if there are any questions here and or comments that I'd like to respond to. And I see there's a good number of people from Facebook, which is pretty amazing. Whenever I go on Facebook now these days, I feel like, wow, I just violated myself. Because every time I'm on it, I know that they are literally harvesting every single behavior, any thought they can. I mean, it's just the way it was set up. If you don't believe me, go to Netflix, which is ironic that this big tech company has revealed what they're actually doing. Go watch Social Dilemma. It's really quite amazing what they reveal there. But there's literally like a digital twin they're developing, which Alison McDowell has done an incredible job in my interviews with her, explaining that they are creating these militarized hedge funds that have these markets which are basically based on turning our virtual twin into a commodified asset that they can manipulate and they can get big gains from. I mean, it's amazing. This is all going on behind the scenes. So I see a lot of Facebook people. I'm not going to really be on very much, and I am probably going to be deleted soon, which is fine by me. So again, stay in touch with the GreenMedInfo and then our future streaming platform. And then, of course, there is Chordal, which is my new favorite project. It is, to check it out, it's a blockchain alternative to the internet as you know it today, which has the ability to enable you to exchange information peer-to-peer without an intermediary, as well as value. So that's the revolution of Bitcoin. Now, I know Bitcoin is like a household name now, and most, I think, are now rightfully so associating it with a bit of greed, and because that's what's going on. It's becoming digital gold 2.0. But when you really understand the promises of Satoshi Nakamoto's original white paper and its introduction after the last financial crisis as a solution to what's happening now, you realize that technically it will be an extinction level event for conventional finance. And that's what's happening right now. In fact, conventional finance is about to implode because the dollar is being printed to oblivion, which has benefits to a degree for the rest of the world because dollar hegemony has been really an instrument of terror. This is Max Kaiser's way of describing it, which I appreciate. So Bitcoin is almost like a vote for peace. It's the people's money, and it is the new digital gold. That said, there's only a limited amount of it, and there are massive big money players coming in, vacuuming up the supply. So therefore, it is becoming more of an elite asset, but it's divisible. So you can own one Satoshi or a millionth of a Bitcoin, and you can still use it as a way to hedge against the dollar depreciating in value, because it's being debased at a rate of the purchasing power of the dollar declining between 20 to maybe 30% a year. In the past year, thanks to COVID-19, right, the pandemic, 33% inflation of our monetary supply. That means that every existing dollar lost 33% of its value. That's real inflation, not CPI or consumer price index, which is completely manipulated to make it look like it's less than 2%. Meaning your dollar is getting destroyed and they're taking your money. It's non-legislated taxation, and it's a form of theft, and it's happening right now to the dollar. So that's why people are getting into Bitcoin. But to me, what's really exciting is not, that, but per se, it's Chordal and other projects. Like Cardano is an example of it. They're trying to find a way around the energy-intensive proof of work method of doing the Bitcoin thing, which is very energy-intensive and gives a lot of power to very few people. Well, Chordal's doing it where they're using minting, which gives everyone who participates in creating the network an equal share in the coin that's minted. So it's a participatory universe, and it's based on providing, an equal distribution of wealth to those who contribute to it. And so it's very exciting because at this stage, the coin's like 50 cents, when in fact the code is better than Ethereum, which is trading at like $1,600. So looking at the fundamentals of the code alone and what it can do, to me, it's so much more exciting because it will produce an alternative way to communicate, exchange value that can't be censored, they can't harvest your data. And this is why, even though it looks so darn dark out there, and again, I'm like excited to be deplatformed because I know that that's going to accelerate me in co-creating the platforms that cannot deplatform you. You can't be taken down on a system like that, like Unstoppable Domains or Chordal. They're going to replace the domain name server system like GreenMedInfo.com. The government could seize that, just under national security concerns. That's what they're saying, is folks like Mercola and myself, because we provide information that renders the conventional narrative questionable, that somehow we're now national security threats and global security threats. Well, you can't take away your name on the Chordal network and other blockchains like that. So there's this amazing Web 3.0 movement, which has evolved so much, because you look at Web 2.0 and you have a handful of tech companies that have centralized everything, which again is built on top of what is fundamentally the military infrastructure. So there's several kill switches there involved. So again, there are ways that we can create our own networks, mesh networks to communicate. It's like a mycelium. It's like literally like a mycelium. So that's going to involve people like you who are looking for a solution to co-create it. Because when you burn your toxic fiat, which is going to die anyway, into legitimate crypto assets, what you've done is you've taken the energy out of the system that has created this whole, if you will, pandemic. I mean, literally, it's the same system that is locking down the world, that is predicated on this highly toxic fiat money system, where only a couple people get to create monetary policy where they can say, one person, I'm gonna print a few trillion more dollars, and everyone else's wealth is completely diluted. Like, how does so much power concentrate into just a few hands? That's because it's centralized. So that's why decentralization is so important on all levels. And that is why we are seeing that now accelerate, because people, even in conventional finance, are realizing, yeah, I've got to get into Bitcoin because literally it's stateless. So the value of the asset isn't backed by very powerful psychopathic men with guns and nuclear weapons. That's literally why the US dollar has value ultimately. It's not because of that. It's because people value it because they've decided that this is going to be their money. It's permissionless, it's trustless. It can be, sent at the speed of light for pennies, basically, especially when the Lightning Network comes out. But literally, if you want to try to transfer a big chunk of gold, you need armed guards and you need, you just can't do it. It's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's why this is part of the solution. So I'm really excited about that. Go to chordal.org. Go ahead, look at it. It's for geeks, I know. They're going to try to make it easier down the road. Run a node on this network. You can use QChat, and you can communicate through an unconfirmed transaction on their blockchain that nobody can see. It literally disappears in 24 hours. So literally, it is what I know to be one of the only truly encrypted, non-surveillable forms of communication on the planet that you can run yourself. And while you're doing it, you're making possible for all the others to use this system. And that is the beauty of it. It's participatory. It's, call it Aquarian versus absolutely totalitarian, which is one person, maybe one fascist, one individual can literally control the lives of everyone on this planet. Why not change that? It can be done. Here, I'll show you the link. Someone was asking Chordal. I did a pretty viral interview on it, so to speak, which is on YouTube, I think. It's on Chordal and the decentralized internet, and it was very well received. And I do think that more people need to know about the space. And yeah, big finance is getting into crypto, and there's a lot of scammers, and that's what happened back during the last run-up in 2017. Is everyone was trying to turn it into Wall Street 2.0. But what we just saw with Wall Street Bets, right, is just a little group of individuals that were pooling their money, were able to basically put out of business a huge hedge fund, which is, operating on extremely predatory principles, right? Cannibalistic predatory principles. And these people are like, you know what? No, we're going to help this company survive, and we're going to cause them to liquidate their shorts. And it was this amazing event showing that what's happening with the cryptocurrency movement is it's empowering people at the very moment that they have no more sovereignty on an economic level. I believe that this pandemic was executed primarily to destroy the sovereignty of those who stood in the way of the agendas, which we know very well involve, unfortunately, enslaving people and poisoning them. I mean, look at GMOs. That's an example. You create a situation where the arable surface of the planet is literally poisoned with a biocide, literally a biocide, right? Not just killing certain non-GMO plants, but kills pretty much everything. So that one bar-coded, patented, glyphosate-resistant plant lives. And then you feed this to people, and it also causes infertility in them. That agenda has been operative for how long? And it's a conspiracy theory to think that the people behind this operation are somehow have shared values when it comes to this. This is their agenda. It's literally to take us down in population, to cull the population. So they can't do that if everyone is economically sovereign. If we're not dependent on universal basic income or bailouts with this fake money, because if they can get us desperate enough and poor enough, they will then roll out the Fed coin and or the global coin, the digital central bank-backed digital currency, which will integrate with our vaccine status and our COVID testing updates, and then that will determine where you get to move in space and what you get to do and how human you get to be. Like, this is their agenda. They made it very clear. So what is the way around that? Is to preserve our wealth and create wealth, and not even doing it with their highly toxic fake dollars. And that is really what's happening right now. So I feel very excited about this because I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I see the opportunities. And to the degree that we can maintain that value, and it may mean that you're going to learn to garden, you're going to learn to get a chicken and get all the benefits. By the way, chickens are happier than people. I was shocked to find that our 8 chickens are basically happier than we are. And I feel envy, and I feel a little bit put off by just how they were running around. I thought chickens were kind of just like, like feathered lizards and just didn't have much going on, but they are just awesome. So the point is, you get back so much more than just eggs. I mean, when you start doing this stuff, you really get back your freedom. You get back your happiness. And that is what we need to do, and get less Facebook and more taking back control of our food production and community. Real wealth equals health, skills, knowledge, tools. Yeah, that's just it. What is value? What is your gift? Identify it and then share it. And by sharing it, you get value back. And that is human nature. That is exactly what these big tech companies have co-opted, weaponized against us, is that when we like something, we're giving it our social proof, our value. It gains social capital. That's why these pages, my original page, 500,000 people, totally gone now. They harvested all of that prana, all that good energy, and they took the data and they weaponized it. They made a lot of money. They helped to facilitate this agenda. So the new social media systems, which by the way is being built on top of Chordal, is going to allow those who get those likes to actually have greater voting in the system that is being evolved. So that is the beauty of it, is that we can create systems that obey natural law, that are ethically designed, that we participate in, that now it's not, again, being intermediated by a select group of people in Davos or other nameless individuals that don't have our best interests in mind. We get to create the new system and be humans while also being in the internet. So that's the beauty of it. Because at one point I was like, all right, internet gone. I'm going to find a place in Costa Rica and see if I can help provide my children a future while everything goes up in flames. And thankfully that didn't happen. And I'm realizing that we need to find a balance and find a new internet, literally, a new social media system. And it is being created. It's not just Chordal, there's others trying to do it, but we are doing it together. And that's why I want you to stay in touch with me, GreenMedInfo.com/newsletter, as well as Telegram. I mean, we really do need to stick together. People that share values. And of course, Kelly and I have our own membership program called Vital Life Project. And that's where we have a select group of people that share our values, that want to be part of our membership. We have an entire sovereignty series. So there are smaller communities popping up that we can all participate in creating, where we share values. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure there's no other questions here. Oh, the mask thing, just by the way, it's so exciting. I felt this boost of energy just the other day when Texas and Mississippi announced an end to the mandatory mask mandates. This is huge. This is huge. I mean, we had 300,000 emails sent to elected officials since our campaign went live in July of last year at Stand for Health Freedom. And it's a small part of the effort, which I know many of you have been standing up, staying strong, not donning the mask of submission. This is having an effect. People are waking up. And this is a huge positive movement, because Florida's that way. I feel very good with Florida. And we are starting to see momentum, because it's going to be grassroots, folks. They decided to show us how we were already owned. We were already brainwashed and owned by the global powers that be. The media had been so centralized. All they had to do was push a button. October 2 in New York in 2019, they literally showed us what they were going to do. They did this high production value event 201, showing us this novel coronavirus pandemic was going to take over the planet. They were going to shut down social media accounts. They were going to do everything they did. Literally showed us. So they've taken over at that level, and it's a top-down crystallization. And as we can see in Israel and other places, it's not going to be pretty if they succeed. But guess what? The United States still does have some rudimentary freedom, and people that are standing up and are taking responsibility for their health and their lives and saying no and establishing a boundary with those who are literally trying to penetrate us. That is what is on the line right now. And it's so encouraging. Like, I am feeling so much better about where we are, because so many of you have taken action. You deserve great, appreciation for those of you who have been doing the good work. And I know that's pretty much probably anybody on this live stream, honestly. So yes, so we are seeing an incredible movement. There's also legislation that's being billed anti-vaccine that is pro-health freedom throughout the country. We're seeing, I think it's 15 plus bills that have been introduced. So we're seeing now what is fundamentally necessary for us to continue to say we live in a constitutionally backed republic, that we actually have freedoms, that we can stand up and say, this piece of paper establishes that I have these rights. We have to act on those. And we are seeing it, which is exciting. Cool. So anyway, I don't know if this has been any help at all, but I hope that it has. I hope that you know that I feel that there is a growing movement of people like us who are totally on our page. And the thing is if you go on Google News Aggregator, I do this sometimes to see how they're spinning the narrative. You're not going to see any of our views or feelings represented, but we are, I know for a fact, the silent majority. And I don't just mean 51%. I would say probably 70 to 80% of Americans actually are good people that know what's going on, that don't get their views represented in the mainstream media. They're not going to even get those represented through Democrats or Republicans. We are on the precipice of a new political movement that is going to be reflected, again, not through all these, rallies and, just maybe even through the conventional political process. It's going to be through organizations like NVIC. It's going to be through like Children's Health Defense, Stand for Health Freedom. Health Freedom Florida is another great example. National Health Federation. There's so many organizations that have been around for so long that have already been doing the work that represents you. They're just waiting for you to take the step of becoming a grassroots activist. Now, remember, the majority of that is taking care of yourself, making sure you're prioritizing your health. That's the most radical, revolutionary act of resistance, is just being healthy, which includes, by the way, not wearing a mask when it's going to harm you. And I've determined that they can only do harm. I have determined they do not help you. If anything, they are fomites that will increase the transmission of biological debris, some of which might be described as viral or exosomal. So technically, standing up, simply being yourself, being healthy, connecting with loved ones, that is going to be what really moves us into this next phase. So anyway, thank you for being part of the live stream. Feel free to share it with others, and I will be in touch through GreenMedInfo, the newsletter, and Telegram.